Dubrovnik, Croatia. Winter is coming. But Katja Sharef feels neither dread nor fear when she hears those words, uttered as a warning in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones fans dressed in costume during a tour on the Karaka, a painstakingly restored wooden ship used in the HBO show. In 2015 in Dubrovnik, there were some 300 show-related tours. In 2017, there were 4,500. Dmitry Kostakov for The New York Times. I feel relief, Sharef said, still wearing her costume, after a grueling day leading yet another Game of Thrones tour. It means I can get a break. Every summer, the hordes descend upon Dubrovnik, a gem of a Croatian city nestled on the Adriatic Sea. The crowds are drawn by the same magical beauty that has long appealed to Hollywood location scouts, such as those who chose the city as the setting for the fictional King's Landing on Game of Thrones, a hit show on HBO, but the annual invading army of tourists toting selfie sticks threatens what attracted them in the first place. After all, it is hard to feel the sublime majesty of this place when crammed in an interminable line simply to gain entry into the city. Article continued below. In recent years, the crowds have grown so bad that Dubrovnik in July has become synonymous with over-tourism, a plight shared by many of the world's most beautiful places. Read more. Walking tour of Dubrovnik packs in Game of Thrones sites. Game of Thrones won't return until 2019. Game of Thrones co-stars Kit Harington and Rose Leslie are married. From the boulevards of Barcelona, Spain, to the canals of Venice, local officials have been struggling to deal with a similar problem, being loved too much, almost to death. In addition to the crowds, the complaints of residents in tourist hotspots include the effect on the local property market and concerns about loudish, disrespectful visitors. Article continued below. Local anger is likely to grow apace with the number of travelers. The United Nations World Tourism Organization estimates there will be 1.8 billion international tourist-related trips by 2030, up from 1.2 billion in 2016. Officials in Dubrovnik have started to push back against the throngs. This summer, they have cracked down on street vendors, limited the number of outdoor restaurant tables crowding the ancient alleyways and, most important, have sought more control over the cruise ships that sent thousands of passengers flooding into the Old Town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This year, the city has limited the number of people who can disembark from the cruise ships at a given time. Next summer, for the first time since they started pulling into port nearly 2 decades ago, cruise ships will face restrictions on when they will be allowed to dock. It is an attempt to find the right balance of welcoming tourists and their money, without being overwhelmed. There is no unique solution for every destination, said Dubrovnik's mayor, Mato Frankovic. But it has to start with recognizing the problem. Just as there is no single solution, there is no single kind of tourist in Dubrovnik. You can find day trippers, families on holiday, people on cruise ship excursions, history buffs, party people and, in a relatively new phenomenon, set jetters. These are people who travel the world in search of the real-life location of their favorite fictional universe. In recent years, there has been no more powerful lure than the sites used as the Seven Kingdoms on Game of Thrones. In 2015 in Dubrovnik, there were some 300 show-related tours. In 2017, there were 4,500. This year, that number is already up 180%, according to tourism officials. Sharef, who led historical tours of the city before the Game of Thrones boom, is always amazed at the questions she's asked. Tourists in Dubrovnik, Croatia, on the old town's fortress wall, which appears in the hit show Game of Thrones. The coastal fort dates from the 13th century. In recent years, the crowds have grown so bad that Dubrovnik in July has become synonymous with over-tourism. Dmitry Kostakov for The New York Times. For instance, she can't count how many people have asked how long it took HBO to build the city's walls. She politely informs the show's fans that the defenses date from the 13th century. She makes it a point to not just lead people to the sites of the show's famous scenes, like the Shame Steps where Cersei Lannister, a queen portrayed by Lena Headey, was paraded naked before an angry public in Season 5, but to offer a peek behind the curtain, a funny and observant take on what it feels like to live in a place turned into a stage set. 6 passengers aboard the Karaka, a painstakingly restored wooden ship used in the show, took turns dressing up as their favorite characters as they sailed around the city. Sharif relayed how one actress asked that all the pretty Croatian girls be replaced with uglier ones, so as not to upstage her. She made frequent references to the astounding amounts of money spent to film what would eventually be a minute or two of footage. She diverted the discussion from the HBO show to marvel at how the crew of the latest Star Wars film spent a reported $10 million US to shoot a scene in Dubrovnik that lasted 15 seconds on screen. Later, after the day's tour was done, she described the city's relationship with Hollywood as complicated but good. She complimented HBO for the respect the crew showed the people in the city. And she noted that for some 6 years, the show had provided a needed lift during the winter, when the crowds are long gone. But while the winter's empty streets present their own problems to city officials, it is the summer crush that is the immediate, pressing problem, and it is the cruise ship industry that is a focus of much of the frustration. Soon after winning election in June 2017, Frankovic took steps to reduce the number of daily cruise passengers sent to the Old City to 4,000 a day by next summer, half the 8,000 recommended by UNESCO, and a dramatic drop from the more than 10,000 who might show up on an average day this July. Sitting in his office in the Old City, Frankovic recalled the time when it seemed Dubrovnik might not survive, let alone become a global tourism magnet. During the Balkan Wars, Croatia was an early battleground as it sought independence from Yugoslavia, and in 1991 Dubrovnik was besieged by the Serb-dominated Yugoslav People's Army. For months, residents who did not flee hunkered down as the Old City came under sustained artillery bombardment. More than half the buildings were damaged, and hundreds of people died. It was not until 1997 that tourism started to pick up, the mayor said. In 2000, the cruise ships started to arrive, and their numbers have continued to grow unabated since. The crucial problem was that tourism was not managed, the mayor said. It just happened. After taking office, he sent a letter to the Cruise Lines International Association, which represents some 60 lines, including Carnival and Royal Caribbean, expressing the need to cut the number of ships docking at the same time. He said that the cruise industry needed time to readjust schedules, but that by next summer, the city could expect to see a dramatic difference in the number of visitors swarming its streets. Still, for each problem officials are trying to address, a new one crops up. For instance, just as Dubrovnik was making headway in battling overcrowding from cruises, Croatian lawmakers liberalized the country's taxi laws, and the number of Uber drivers spiked, especially along the country's scenic coast. Last year, there were 250 taxi drivers in Dubrovnik. This summer, according to the mayor, there are more than 1,200. The roads simply cannot handle the traffic. For local business owners like Gerda Metkovic, who runs the Malvasia wine bar in the Old City, in addition to limiting tourists, more could be done to promote quality local products. While there are no chain stores such as McDonald's or Subway in the Old City, the streets are still dominated by markets selling cheap trinkets and t-shirts. The wine Metkovic serves is from the vineyard of her father, Bozo Metkovic. She also produces her own olive oil. Among the bustle of the summer crowds, her bar feels like a refuge. It's a special place, she said of her home city, the kind of place where visitors should take away a memory that will last longer than any t-shirt.